And our prayers go out to number 04A5316, wherever he is.
So the shiur is sponsored by our friend Mishel and dedicated to the memory of our three boys that we unfortunately lost and found their bodies yesterday.
Yeah. So one of them was from a yeshuv that my cousin lives in. I didn't know until I read the news today. So staying true to our theme that that there isn't anything that you can't learn from Sefer Mishneh. There's no reason for us to deviate from the Sefer in order to make sense of some of what's going on in the world today. I have to tell you, aside from this most recent disaster, if you do follow the world news, there is a lot of craziness going on. It's not just in Israel. It's look what's going on in North Korea, Ukraine, Russia, and all of the Arab world, North Africa, through the Middle East since this Arab Spring, Syria, Iraq, Brazil is all coming apart right now at the seams, naturally. Right, so you're really happy that America is also... Must be, right. We need a new prime minister now. This is an embarrassment.
Well, France almost exploded. Algeria has won the...
Well, also the irony is that now France actually has to fight against Germany for the first time in their history. It's very interesting. I don't know if they'll make it out with all their equipment in pristine condition this time. So there's a very it's a relatively frequently quoted two psukim. This is actually quoted often enough, believe it or not, in the Midrashim, more specifically in the Zohar Kadosh. This is already, we're fast forwarding to chapter 30 in Mishneh. And this chapter is a little bit unique in the sense that it gives a number of lists. It lists things in order, kind of like Pirkei Avot, so sometimes you'll have 3 things in a particular category, a list of 10 items or 10 midot, 4 different midot people can embody when it comes to tzedakah, when it comes to study, etc. It should go without saying that the shiur is dedicated to Nishmat, the three boys that were found yesterday. But you have to leave it to Shlomo HaMelech to put this in such a context, in such a perspective, as to nail the truth in it for generations to come. I'll tell you something that Rav Sabato used to say, and in no disrespectful way. You can probably spend every day of the year going to some kind of protest or some kind of a prayer. It's important to express emotions. It's important to come together. It's important to express solidarity for the nation. The tefillot are important. The tefillot help. The tefillot do tremendous things that we're not able to see. When it comes to your own perspective, your own nefesh, your own ability to digest these calamities, to make some constructive sense of it and to be able to move on, the learning is probably more important. I don't mean to belittle, they're both important, they both go hand in hand. The point is that when you learn something and you learn the truth that's behind it, you've got a key that'll help you not only through this disaster, but through future others as well. So you can go to pray for something and the prayer is important. It helps you to settle your emotions, it helps you to focus and concentrate your energy, it gives you a sense of unison, with the rest of the nation, and it's crucial, it's important. That's probably one of the most important functions we can fill as a nation at times of stress or pressure like this. But the learning goes so deep, and it saturates so much of what you do, your thoughts, your actions, your prayers even, afterwards, that it does leave maybe in a way a more lasting impression on the nefesh than just the tefillah itself, which is why our day consists of more than tefillah. So the psukim I'd like to focus on, this is towards the end of chapter 30, all of 31 chapters Sefer Mishneh, and there's a tiny little paragraph composed of all of 3 psukim, 21, 22, and 23. And it reads like this: Tachat shalosh ragasha eretz, v'tachat arba lo tuchal se'et. Literally, under 3 things the earth shakes, meaning the earth reacts violently to these things. V'tachat arba, lo tuchal se'et. And under 4, meaning if you were to add a force to this category, the earth couldn't bear, literally couldn't hold the weight of this pressure. Tachal eved ki imloch. So one of them is because of situations in which a slave becomes king. Eved ki imloch. Naval ki sabah lachem. Naval is someone corrupt, a scoundrel, if you will, a scoundrel who is sated with bread. So the world is full of scoundrels, we know this, and as we said, we appointed some of them to the Senate and some of them to the Congress, the House of Representatives. Scoundrels, a criminal, a charlatan, a politician.
Oh, your new friend.
Huh?
Your new friend.
Right, somewhere between a charlatan, criminal, and bank robber. So you have the slave who ends up ruling, who becomes the king. You have the criminal, the deceitful charlatan who is sated with bread. Seems to imply that there are people that are more righteous than him that are hungry. I mean, that's the injustice, the earth-shaking injustice of the situation. Last pasuk, Senua Kiti Ba'el. This is a hated woman, apparently, once again, a reference to the harlot, the woman lacking in tzniut, who finds herself a husband. V'shivcha kitirash givirta, and a maidservant who inherits. The implication is in the place of her mistress. So, again, to run off the list, to summarize, we have Eved Ki Imloch, we have the slave who rules in lieu of the king, which is a little bit difficult to understand. Normally we think of kings, we think of... okay, it's on the... So we have the king who is replaced by a slave, by the lowest of the low-ranking individuals in his estate. We have the Naval Ki Sabah Lachem, this criminal who is sated with bread, meaning the criminal who prospers. Sinua Kiti Ba'el, a despicable woman who finds herself married, happy, content. And Shivcha Kitirash Givrata, and the maidservant who ends up inheriting instead of the mistress of the household. So, how do you understand what Shlomo Melech is trying to get at? Why spend the precious psukim describing things that seem how likely is this to happen? So the king losing his kingdom to someone of unimpressive genealogy. I guess in theory such a thing could happen once or twice in the course of history. Not all that often. Criminals that prosper, I can see that. And the other two situations are where, it's difficult enough to find someone normal and to get married. When someone despicable manages to do this, and people who are more righteous, people who make more efforts, who are more sincere, have difficulty with it, there's a certain degree of perceived injustice. It's difficult for us to see situations like this and to sit still. That actually sounds like parallel to the first situation, the slave that inherits. So in comes the Zohar Kadosh, and the Zohar describes these realities in terms of Yetzer Hara, the battle between good and evil. So Eved Ki Imloch, who's the slave? Who's the individual? The one described in the pasuk as a slave. This is Yetzer Hara that is supposed to serve, supposed to be completely subservient to Yetzer HaTov. Its desire is only supposed to be to further the desires of Yetzer HaTov. So, yes, Yetzer Hara wants to eat, but you should be able to eat only enough as you need to focus in the shiur, to pray, to get your work done, etc. When the Eved becomes the king, when the aspect of your essence, of your existence, ends up being the king, ends up signing the checks, ends up making the decisions, Yetzer HaTov is gone. Nowhere to be found. So instead of the neshama being in control, you have Yetzer Hara making the decisions, calling the shots. Naval ki sabah lachem. So yes, here in Olam Hazeh, in this world, we're used to seeing, unfortunately, criminals who prosper, who succeed, people who are unjust, unrighteous, corrupt in their ways, deceitful, and nonetheless they succeed and they prosper. Many of them are in fact appointed to public office. And we find people who are hardworking, people who are genuine, people who are honest, that have difficulty making parnasah. How do you explain the injustice? If someone who had never learned anything before comes to Olam Hazeh and says, wow, this is pretty crazy. A lot of these crooked individuals are making a decent living. A lot of people that work hard and try just aren't. So you have the Sinuah, Kiti Ba'el, you find, once again, corruption, Yetzer Hara, the forces of evil that find themselves in happy company. And the forces of good are sitting there waving a flag in very small numbers, not finding any support. And Shivcha Ki Torah Shel Givrotah, all the good that was destined for those who observe the mitzvot ends up where? In the hands of those who are wicked. This doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. It's not fair. Tell me I'm doing the right thing and I should get rewarded. I would expect it to be this way. Why is there such a gap, such a distance between what I believe, what I'm told I deserve as someone who tries to observe the mitzvot, and what I actually have? Okay, so tell me that my reward is coming partially in Olam Hazeh, partially in Olam Haba. I wouldn't even mind so much were it not for the fact that there are people who are completely non-observant, people whose lifestyles are completely antithetical to spirituality, to Torah, to mitzvot, and they have a decent parnasah. See, I don't get that. Put us both on level playing field. Tell me, you know what? You don't have parnasah and he doesn't either. We both live in the same country. When it doesn't rain, there's a drought for everyone. There's a shortage of food. Fair enough. I have no parnasah, neither does he. I work and I wake up early. I go to bed late in order to pray, in order to observe the mitzvot, and he does nothing. Fair enough. So I don't have a parnasah for whatever reason you want to tell me, because reward for the tzaddikim comes in the next world, not in this world. But that the criminal should have an easier time than I do? Someone corrupt, someone completely morally bankrupt should have an easier time with his or her parnasah than I should with mine? That's already unjust. That's beyond fair game. We're not playing by the same rules. There was a conference once of rabbis that dealt with Kiruv Rachukim outreach, trying to bring people, let's say proselytes, it sounds so Christian. Rabbis that are trying to bring people back into the fold of Torah observance. This was in Lakewood. And so Rav Matityahu Solomon, who was I believe he still is, the Mashgiach Ruchani of the Yeshiva Gedolah of Lakewood, he was presiding over this particular part of the conference. And so a colleague of mine went, and he told me that Lakewood had started maybe 50 years after Chabad, but they started basically sending groups to certain places where there are no Torah institutions, teaching people about the basics, Torah, mitzvot, what they mean, etc., getting them to observe basic mitzvot. And so they were debating amongst themselves, how do we get people to observe the mitzvot? How do you entice or seduce someone to do the right thing? The Torah, the Gemara in many places, the Nevi'im promise us, for example, that there are rewards for the mitzvot that you do, but the rewards are pretty much exclusively in Olam Haba. Is it right? Is it proper? Is it honest of us to even pretend to be able to make guarantees to people who start observing mitzvot, their lives are going to get better? Rav Solomon said, no. The answer is, as a matter of fact, if you were to survey most of the family that start observing mitzvot, their lives become more complicated, they become more difficult. First of all, if up until now you were buying non-kosher food, kosher food is 10 times more expensive. Sending your kids to Jewish schools are more expensive. What do you want to tell me? Every kid that comes out of a private Jewish school comes out a tzaddik, comes out a genius, super successful? I wish that were the case. And everyone who goes to public school comes out a criminal? Not necessarily. So the point that he made was, you have no right whatsoever to promise anybody anything even resembling some kind of sachar, some kind of reward for anything you do in Olam Hazeh. In fact, you might even reasonably expect your life to become more difficult when you do teshuvah. That's not an easy sale. It's not a very easy point to market. The point that he was making was that it's not inconsistent with the rules the way that we're familiar with. In other words, let me abstract a little bit from the topic at hand. There are different reasons for which people prosper and people fail, and there is very little correlation between what you can see someone enjoying or earning by way of a parnasa or a lifestyle, a standard of living, and what judgments you can allow yourself to draw, to conclude from the facts as you see them. So the really simple perspective, you would expect that Hashem gives good things to good people and bad things to bad people. So if the guy in the office next to me drives a BMW, well, maybe he's just more of a tzaddik than I am. Maybe I need to imitate him. I need to copy more of his midot. What knows a few guys like this? Yeah, sure. Do what they do, go where they go, enjoy what they enjoy, and you should be living the good life. If you see someone who's observant and you see that he's poor, what kind of publicity is this for Torah and mitzvot? Can you point to someone who's observant and say, look, the guy's got a difficult life and things have been tough, but he's honest, he has his emunah, and he sticks to his principles. But he's suffering. He's suffering. Is that the kind of suffering I want? Are you trying to convince me to leave my life of comfort and luxury in order to pursue a life of religious misery? I mean, not that everyone who's observant is miserable either, chas v'shalom, but the point is a difficult one to ignore. You see people in Olam Hazeh who behave in terrible ways and who prosper, and that's difficult to digest. Where does this money come from? Did God not give it to them? Maybe they stole it. Why would God let them steal it or let them enjoy it? And you see people that are struggling with their parnasah. Why doesn't it happen? Why doesn't it work? So the easy segue from here is to situations like the one that came to light yesterday, which is, how do you explain that three religious, observant boys love Torah, love mitzvot, meet such a terrible end? When the guys who killed them are still out on the loose, they might get caught, they might not. They might still be in the country, they might not. As long as they're not in Israel, I don't think anyone else in the world cares. Interpol's not looking for these people. Let your heart not be too worried. If there is an international police force, they couldn't care less what happened to the Jews. So I doubt Interpol's going to knock on their doors in the middle of the night and get them out of some casino in Bahrain or Dubai. It's just not going to happen. These guys could live a very happy, luxurious life. And in fact, these people, they're not even dead yet. They can't even be martyrs. But there's certainly examples to be emulated as far as the Islamo-fascist psycho-fundamentalist regime is prospering. So the point that Roanech is making is that these situations are very difficult for us in Olam Hazeh to understand or to bear. There are promises that tzaddikim prosper, and there are promises that Rashayim are going to pay. Incidentally, it's a beautiful pasuk in Tehillim, Yismach tzaddik ki chazan achav, v'amar yurchatz b'dam harasha. Literally, most literally. The tzaddik, a righteous one, will be happy, will rejoice when he sees vengeance. In other words, the vengeance of Hashem against the Rashayim. V'amar yurchatz b'dam harasha. He can wash his feet in the blood of the wicked. And once judgment finally comes to Olam Hazeh. So vengeance is a good thing. This is actually what we'd like to see. So the Vilna Gaon points out on this pasuk that divine vengeance is something tremendous that we have to pray. You have to have merit in order to witness such a thing. What does that mean? He proves this, in fact, from the Mizmor we're going to say tomorrow morning at Tefillah. The Mizmor shel Yom Revi, shel Yom. El nechamot Hashem, el nechamot Hofiya, Yinaseh Shofet ha'aretz shel Gumar Revi'im. So David HaMelech effectively cries to Hashem and he says, the mighty one, the mighty God of vengeance. May the mighty God of vengeance appear. Hinaseh shofet haaretz. May the judge of the land, rise up. Hashev gimul al geim, and return the fitting punishment to the people who are proud, to the Rashayim who do whatever they want. And he goes on and he explains. There are those who commit crimes. They believe that Hashem doesn't see. Right? They do whatever they want. They murder, they steal, they kill. And they say, God doesn't see. The Lord of Yaakov doesn't understand. He rebukes them and he says, you imbeciles, you boors, understand. When are you going to comprehend? Hashem is the one who created eyes, what he can't see. The one who causes prosperity and suffering for the goyim, he's not going to eventually mete it out accordingly. The Ramban points this out in Moreh Nevuchim when he says like this: there's a delay between what a person does and the reward or punishment that comes to him or her. This is, the way he defines it, the test of emunah. You do the right thing, and what? You expect a check in the mail tomorrow? If that's the case, nobody would do the right thing for the right reasons. You do the right thing, and you expect an average, normal, ordinary life. Okay, so I can still revert back to, was it Blaise Pascal, right? Le Pari de Dieu, the gamble on God. So be observant. Why? Because most observant people are okay. They live normal lives. If God exists, fine. If not, nothing ventured, nothing gained. You didn't lose anything major. Rambam says, no, you're being tested. Your emunah is being tested by the delay, by the lapse in time between what you do and what you receive for it. And the test is doubly difficult because there are people who do the wrong thing and who manage nonetheless to make a living. Sometimes they even make a better living than you and me. So the Zohar explains like this. This is quoted, by the way, in Michtav Eliyahu. It's a beautiful Sefer. We should look into it at some point. Letters written by Rabbi Eliyahu Dessler, who spent the Second World War in hiding in England, and he corresponded in so far as letters were coming and going. He corresponded with his students, who for the most part wrote him letters on questions of emunah. This is during the war. And so he writes like this. A lot of what he quotes is from the Zohar. He's just very humble about it and doesn't necessarily quote it directly. So he gives you a Kabbalistic explanation of how Hashem lets the world function. When someone does a mitzvah, your reward comes to you from Hashem. It might take time. You're probably not going to get most of it in Olam Hazeh. You might not get any of it in Olam Hazeh. The Gemara has a whole discussion about this. Is there such a thing as reward for mitzvot in Olam Hazeh? The conclusion of that Gemara, Sechar mitzvot b'haya alman lekam. There is no reward for the mitzvot in Olam Hazeh. Why? Explains the Ramban. Nachmanides, because all the gold, silver, money, jewels in the world are still material and still limited, whereas the reward that you deserve for doing the Tilat Yadayim even once is infinite. Nothing material could possibly be worthy of being compensation for a mitzvah that you observed properly, because there's no way to translate a spiritual concept into material goods. What you need is enough material in order to subsist, in order to survive, but you don't necessarily need wealth. So the reward that you receive for doing something good is a different kind of reward that the Rasha believes he gets when he worships his Yetzer Hara. And so he explains like this. This is a quote right out of the Zohar HaKadosh. Hashem, when he created the world, created Yetzer HaTov and Yetzer Hara, and he gave Yetzer Hara a budget. Yetzer Hara has a budget, has a checking account. And Yetzer Hara is permitted within certain limits to cut salary checks, right, to put on payroll the people who worship him. And so you worship Hashem and you get rewarded from Yetzer HaTov, from the holy side of the creation. And if you do something wrong, Hashem allows Yetzer Hara, in order to keep this veil of free will intact, in order for you not to say, well, I do mitzvot, I get money, she doesn't do mitzvot, she doesn't, so I'm going to do this because I want the money. So those who worship Yetzer Hara, those who do averot, those who live a corrupt and criminal lifestyle, an immoral lifestyle, do nonetheless receive their reward, but they get their reward from somewhere else. They get their reward from the unholy side of spirituality, and this kind of reward is toxic. This isn't reward for doing the right thing. It's the kind of reward that actually pushes you away from Hashem. You may not be familiar with this. The punishments that are meted out in Gan Eden, when Hashem punishes in order, it's actually the Nahash, the serpent, representative of Yetzer Hara, Hawa, and then Adam. And so the punishment the Nahash gets is Arur Rata. Hashem punishes him. He's cursed from all the creations on the earth. From now on, you transport yourself on your stomach, and you eat dust. Okay, snakes don't eat dust. What do they eat? They eat insects, they eat rodents, they eat things that move. So the Midrash says, so what's Hashem telling the Nachash? As far as I'm concerned, let your parnasah be as plentiful to you as the dust on the earth. There are no shortages of rodents. If you live in New York City, you know this by now. There are no shortages of rodents. There are rats and there are mice everywhere. And so, the representative of Yetzer Hara in Olam Hazeh, not that a snake is Yetzer Hara, we just use this as a metaphor, gets unlimited parnasa. In other words, he has access to unlimited funds. Snakes don't die of starvation. So what's the Midrash telling you? It's telling you that in order to come close to Hashem, you have to go through this test of emunah. What's the test of emunah? You do the right thing and you hold your breath. You hold your breath. You have to wait. You just have to wait. Are you doing it for the right reasons? Are you going to persist? Are you going to continue to do it? Are you waiting for feedback? Are you waiting for candies? Or are you actually doing this because you believe in it? Are you going to deal with adversity? Are you going to deal with difficulty? Are you going to actually convince yourself that this is the right thing to do, no matter what happens, whether or not the money comes, whether or not anyone notices or recognizes, whether or not I get recognition for what I'm doing? Whereas the Rasha does whatever he or she feels like, enjoys the reward, and uses this to reinforce negative behaviors. So I decided I wanted to lie to somebody. Oh, look at that, I found someone who bought my lie, now I have his money. And so therefore what? Therefore you're going to continue down this evil path. You've been rewarded, so to speak, for doing the wrong thing. Now you have an incentive to continue behaving this way. Now it's going to be much more difficult for you to come back to Hashem. Why is this? Because you'll be so sated, you'll be so full of yourself. You've come to enjoy a certain lifestyle. It's all a house of cards, it's all built on lies. But you'll come to enjoy it so much, it'll be difficult for you to let go. And even if it's not in your particular personal case, it's even true of injustices, quote unquote, that you see around you. How can it be that innocent people suffer, and how can it be that these wicked people prosper? You know what? I don't judge people's success or failure based on whether or not they prosper. I don't judge my own personal success on how wealthy I am. If I lived my life according to these criteria, I'd be living it very differently. I'd be doing a profit and loss statement on every day. I'd be doing cost-benefit analyses of everything that I choose to do. I'd help people who have money. I'd ignore people who are poor. I'd be basically doing whatever it is that fills me, that satisfies me, that satiates me, and I would ignore opportunities to do things that don't pay off for whatever reason. And so the definition of emunah is this. By the way, this is also classic, right? A gem from Rav Ashkenazi that I received from Rav Rebbe. The word emunah in Hebrew, laha'amin, for example, we use it to believe, to have faith in something. So, emun, or amun in Hebrew, actually means as an adjective, someone who has a habit. Someone who's used to, who's accustomed to something. For example, we have a pasuk like this in Echa. Ha'emunim alei Torah. When Yirmiyahu Navi describes the destruction of Beit HaMikdash and the tremendous fall from luxury when Am Yisrael was living under the Jewish Empire was tremendously wealthy. They were living in relatively peaceful times. And the pasuk describes those Ha'emunim alei Torah, those who were accustomed to wearing silk, all of a sudden find themselves in rags, like they have nothing to wear. So emun alei Torah literally means people who are accustomed, who are used to something. So what's the test of emunah? The test of emunah is to develop customs, to develop habits, to get yourself out of this mentality of I'm going to do this because I'm going to get something for it, or I'm going to imitate her, I'm going to copy him because she gets attention, because he gets money, because he or she is popular, etc. You do the right thing and you ignore, you avoid making these quick comparisons and falling into that trap of saying, well, this person has it better, that one has it worse, etc. One more layer I'd like to put on this before I give you guys a quick break from this. We mentioned last year by Tisha B'Av an amazing midrash. The midrash says that it quotes the. So now we're barreling down on the 3 weeks. So from Hazono Yeshayahu ben Amos, the first chapter of Sefer Yeshayahu, where the Navi says, amongst other things, where he criticizes Yerushalayim it went from the capital of righteousness and the capital of spirituality to the capital of corruption. And among other things, he says like this: Maleati mishpat tzedek yalim ba wa'ata baratzeh. Maleati mishpat, the city that was once full of justice, the city that was once full of judges, of tribunals. I mean, everybody could get their cases adjudicated in Yerushalayim. We cared that people weren't being lied to or cheated or robbed. So the city that was once full of justice, tzedek yalim ba, the place where righteousness resided, literally where righteousness slept, And now the city is full of murderers. As many righteous people as you had in Yerushalayim before the destruction, you have more murderers than you do righteous people. At least that's the way Yeshaya describes it. So the Midrash says, what does that mean, that righteousness sleeps in Yerushalayim? So what does it mean? It means, says the Midrash, that it was impossible for someone to sleep in Yerushalayim and wake up healthy, in good condition, if he or she had committed an Avirah. You went to Yerushalayim, you put your head down, you woke up the next morning, you were sick. What happened? You spoke Lashon Hara on the bus on the way there. You bought something and you took too much change, forgot to give somebody their change, you saw a lost object, forgot to return it, whatever it was. This is Midrash. This is the beauty of Yerushalayim. That these things would happen almost automatically, so quickly. The response time between what you do and the reality around you was super quick. So a question that we once asked Rav Sabato, why did this stop? Why did the reality change? Why, if you want to encourage people to do good and not to do bad, why of all things would you pull the plug on this program? How great would the world be if everybody went to sleep, and if you didn't at least confess over what you did wrong the previous day, you'd wake up feeling terrible, physically sick, you'd have to do some introspection, find out what you did wrong, you'd have to repent. So this, Rav Sabato explained, was a gift. This was a gift. When we're on a high level, spiritually speaking, then the response time becomes quicker. And you can expect people who do good things to see reward more quickly, people who do bad things to see their punishment more quickly. It's a reflection of the very low level of spirituality in Olam Hazeh that the response time is so long. It's what the Vilna Gaon is saying by the Nekama, by seeing Hashem's vengeance on the Goyim. He says, this is something every righteous person should pray every day. You should have the merit to witness such a thing with your own two eyes. In other words, it's been so long, Hashem has been so patient with the world. At some point, your blood already boils. You would love nothing more. It would appease your spirit to be able to see that justice is finally served. People who do evil actually are punished. People who do the right thing actually get rewarded. It's only because the world's on such a low level of spirituality that the delay is so long. And so the test of Emunah is that much more difficult. Why do we need a much more difficult test of Emunah? Because we don't have it. Once we develop it, once we regain our Emunah, there's no longer a need for this test, so to speak. And so you hear expressions like this. In the future there won't be Yetzer Hara, there won't be as much of a test. It's precisely this. When we're at a point that the reward and the punishment are irrelevant to what we choose to do, the response time will come more quickly, as long as we still worship the people who have it good. And we cry injustice when we do something and we expect a reward for it right away. We're not at the point that we deserve that quicker response time. So the test continues. Yeah, there. So two things. One, the Gemara says when it comes to vengeance on your enemies or being happy when someone fails, that applies to your fellow Jew, or a more or less observant one. If someone is extremely wicked, insert necessary reference to politicians, you sometimes, it'd be nice to see some of these people punished for the terrible decisions they make, for their inaction, for their apathy, for their indifference to the nation, for their refusal to defend the citizens of the country, for their refusal to stand up to terrorism, for their refusal to take actions to prevent things like this from happening in the first place. The incompetence of these people, the fact that they're more concerned with what the rest of the international community thinks than the citizens who elected them and appointed them to their positions of power, their positions of prominence. It's an outrage. So whether or not this applies to Jews who are wicked is an excellent question. But the Gemara says very specifically this has absolutely no relevance whatsoever to non-Jews. We would all love to see terrorists punished. We would love to see the society, the entire culture built around this, that promotes it, that praises it, that entices people into a paradise in Olam Hazeh and Olam Haba for killing people. A culture that promotes murder, that promotes attacking people wantonly, randomly, arbitrarily. It's insanity. So we would love to see this culture punished. We'd love to see these people suffer. I'll clap and I'll dance when the time comes. The same way these psychopaths clap and dance when they managed to kill someone who did absolutely nothing. But this is it's something you need to deserve, something you need to merit. be able to see such a thing. Why do I say this? Because the world is not yet deserving of it. The other question that you asked, really, this is the Gemara says, the Midrash points this out as well. It's from the story of Abraham and Sarah, where Sarah, after having given Abraham Hagar, she becomes pregnant right away, starts making fun of Sarah. So Sarah's response to this, she says to Abraham, "Hamasi alecha, my rage is on you. I gave you my maidservant, I placed her in your arms. She sees that she becomes pregnant, and I become nothing to her. I become light in her eyes. Yishpot Hashem beni u'benecha. May Hashem judge between me and you." And so the Midrash says, and what happens a few paragraphs later? Matamot Sarah, so what happens? Well, Sarah herself, who laughed in disbelief when Hashem told her she was going to have, the Malach tells her she's going to have a child, she was also, as perfect gets, but she had a few tiny spots on her record. When you're the one who invokes justice, when you're the one who calls, who calls the spiritual police, they will arrest you too. You'll be judged the same way. It doesn't work that way. You can't invoke justice on someone, invoke judgment on someone, and yourself claim a diplomatic immunity. That only works for politicians. In a world run by and for politicians, you can do things like this. I'm a politician, I'm above the law, do whatever I want, and I can punish you and I can take away your money and give it to somebody else. So in the real world, when you invoke judgment, the judgment is across the board. And we're even better off not invoking this judgment until we're ready to pass it. So it's a slippery slope. At the same time, because of our spiritual laziness, because of our low level, we have to deal with things like this. We have to deal with things like this. There's a whole wealth of information on why specifically righteous people die. What does it mean when someone is attacked like this? And the Arizal talks about this. Maybe next week we'll do this for the Shiva. The whole concept of righteous people dying and how that influences the rest of us once they're no longer here. These boys were killed specifically because they were Jewish, even more so because they were observant settlers. They were settling the land that we know is ours, the Torah says so. So what does it mean when someone's punished specifically for being Jewish? It's a Kiddush Hashem. The same way that even a non-observant Jew during the Shoah was considered a Kiddush Hashem. This is someone who's killed specifically only because they're Jewish. And there's a tremendous impact on the way judgment happens in the non-physical world when someone like this is removed from Olam Hazeh in such a way. The Rizal actually has quite an explanation about this. He talks about the paragraph that begins read this in the Tefillah after Hodu. So he says these are 10 psukim. These 10 psukim correspond to the 10 martyrs that were killed during the Roman Empire. And he says the reason there's a pasuk that corresponds to every one of them is because each and every one of them did something so tremendous by sacrificing, meaning that they chose to be killed. But by being killed for nothing but Kiddush Hashem, we're Jews, we teach the Torah, even if you don't want us to, we're going to continue doing it. But he said that this is a necessary paragraph as a prelude to our own tefillah. Tefillot, there's a door that was opened by this that previously was not easy to get tefillot through. We'll talk about it next week. It's a fascinating concept. But the idea is just that. It's a reflection on the low spiritual level of the entire world that we need to deal with this. It should upset you. It should infuriate you. It should drive you crazy to the point that you accept upon yourself to change. Stop doing things you shouldn't be doing. Start doing things you should be doing. And we will no longer have to, in the long run, no longer have to deal with things of this nature. So Shalom Alev tells you in Mishel, these are things that are unbearable for the world. What does it mean? If it keeps on happening, the world's going to break? You should break. You should see something like this and say, this is impossible. This is irrational. This is incomprehensible. There's no way I can see what just happened. Or if you ask me how the world responded or didn't respond to it, it infuriates me 1,000 times more. There's no way you can read this, you can see this, you can see how people behave and how they react and how they respond, and wake up tomorrow and say, I'm going to do the same things I did yesterday or the day before. And so in response to this, when you change your outlook, you change your perspective, you change your spiritual attitude, you can help close the gap, you can help shorten the delay between doing a good deed and a reward coming and doing something wrong and punishment coming. This is effectively what we're hoping for. So in the meantime, we have to deal with corrupt people who are satiated, who live and who prosper, righteous people who suffer. But this is the test of emunah. Once we demonstrate our emunah, the emunah brings us to the point. Rabbi used to say this: there is no such thing as emunah in your freezer. There is no emunah in your backpack. There is no emunah anywhere but where you find actions. Someone who tells you, I have emunah even though I'm not observant, or I have emunah even though I don't keep Shabbat, I don't keep Torah, really has very, 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 very little of anything that almost resembles emunah. Emunah means you do. If you have emunah, you change the way you behave, you change the way you conduct yourself. This is the only evidence of emunah. People who talk and people who say nice things but don't do anything are expressing that they actually have a lack of emunah, a lack of faith. They don't believe that if they change, they can make a difference, which is the ultimate form of depression.
What you said about the fact that there is not at all any physical reward in this world for the things that you do, or like what you can do, or like the fact that there is no, you cannot see like justice. It works on the at the level of the people, of the single person. But I guess it doesn't work at the level of the nation. Because like you have like you see like the protect Ebola, you have very clear answer like physical rewards or physical punishment for like everything you do right, you get everything, and if you go wrong, you get destroyed, punished, exiled, and everything.
So you're saying at the national level, how does this work?
Yeah, I mean what you said just work at the level of the single person. It doesn't work at the level of the Jewish.
So at the level of the nation, we have responsibilities as a nation. As a matter of fact, I had a long discussion with somebody about this a couple of years ago. What are our responsibilities as a nation? To respond to situations like this. How? I don't understand how these politicians look at themselves in the mirror. How they can look at themselves seriously without either crying or laughing hysterically at the mockery they make of themselves. You're a politician, you're responsible for the welfare of the nation. Take responsibility. How do you stand by and watch people get killed and do nothing? All the weapons they confiscated, all the terrorists they arrested, they could have done this years ago. They know where these people live. But they're afraid what people are going to say. I didn't vote for you to be afraid of what people are going to say. France didn't vote for you. England didn't vote for you. Germany didn't vote for you. You have a nation. You behave. You take responsibility for the nation. Take this responsibility seriously. These are the people who can actually make a very immediate difference anyway. At the national level, we have to deal with things like this because the nation is very weak, because the leaders of the nation are very weak. So it's true that you individually can make a difference. The nation as a whole can make a much bigger difference. By the way, I don't know if you followed the news, but there were some fascinating breakthroughs in the last couple of weeks. Yair Lapid, whose father was like the most avowed atheist the planet has ever seen. Yair Lapid, who's currently in politics, in fact is a part of the coalition government, he said he prayed for the first time in like 30 years. Yeah. He actually got up and he said, he put on a kippah and he prayed. I mean, this is like, this is an atheist putting on tefillin. That's
he's the most active guy among religious
we can discuss him some other time. I mean, he's an interesting character. I happen to agree with some, like, I'd like to see the religious population drafted in the army, and I would like to see an end to socialism. So in that sense, people taking responsibility for themselves is very much a Torah concept. I'd love to see that happen, but I was like, yeah, right. The extremes always meet at some point, but yeah, I mean, I support some of his libertarian views. He's not libertarian enough, but I think it's funny that it's bitterly ironic. But this, look what the situation did to him. And I'm not saying he responded the way he should have. I wish they did more. But if the guy looks at this and he says, "This is horrible. Those could have been my kids. What can I do? I can pray. I can just pray to Hashem it should stop. I can pray to Hashem that he should change this, that he can do something to make it end." It's a very powerful thing. Another point, I didn't want to spend the whole evening on this, but another point that I want to make, and it's an important one. It's not uncommon that things have to break before they get better. So sometimes the nefesh has to go through this too. Sometimes people don't change until they hit rock bottom, until they actually collapse. You know, sometimes you believe in yourself so much that until you're actually broken, you can't really start to fix what was wrong. And this is the conundrum of the Rasha. As long as the Rasha prospers, as long as the Rasha benefits, as long as the Rasha is comfortable, this comfort will kill you. Incidentally, we quoted that maybe not last week, 2 weeks ago. Shalwat Rashaim ta'bedim. It's the tranquility of the Rashaim that destroys them. In other words, Hashem doesn't need to strike these people dead. Hashem doesn't need to send a bolt of lightning in order to kill them. They kill themselves. It's a spiritual suicide. Doing the wrong thing and being happy and continuing to do it. So the Mishnah says in Masechet Sanhedrin, you're dead now. The Rashaim, while they're alive, are considered dead. There's nothing more depressing than someone who is so content with him or herself that they stop growing, they stop changing, they stop learning. That's awful. That's hell. That's hell. That's condemnation to perpetuity in status quo. It's horrible. It's a good thing that sometimes bad things happen. Not that you wish they would. We wouldn't request it. But when something terrible happens and you break down and you start crying or you give up, or so this is where change actually becomes possible. Your defenses are useless. You realize that's nothing you can do to, within your own strength to fix the situation. And so you come to a point where you just accept there's something bigger than you. And now we can start talking. Yair Lapid, that was pretty big. I hope it lasts. That was pretty big. If he comes to a point where the guy tells you, look, I'm not really big into prayer, but I don't see anything else I can do right now that's going to be of any help, may as well turn to God and ask Him to do something. It's very powerful. As long as we believe in ourselves, as long as we trust in ourselves, as long as we believe that we have the solution to all of our problems, we're not going anywhere. Not as individuals and not as a society. So sometimes when the entire society breaks down, it opens the door for a positive change. There were some, unfortunately, it's a terrible situation, but if you look into some of these, the stories, like the side stories, not the ones that got the headlines, there was some cooperation, some collaboration, a lot of unity, people from different camps and different groups. Listen, these boys, I just found out today one of them was from, lived in the same yeshuv as one of my cousins. They very much represented the religious Zionist movement in Israel. As settlers, I think all three of them lived, beyond the 67 borders, which is actually where real Israel starts, by the way. I don't know if you're familiar with this. All the cities that are mentioned in the Tanakh are actually beyond the 67 borders. Tel Aviv is mentioned nowhere. Yafo, maybe, Akko. But other than this, you have what? Shechem, Hebron, Yericho, Yerushalayim. All these places that are currently full of Arabs are actually the holiest places in Israel. So, not because they're full of Arabs. So no one should come out with the wrong impression. But the reality is that if you found Haredim, for example, that were praying for the welfare of these boys, that's a very big political divide to cross. These are people who are ideologically opposed to this. A lot of these people are ideologically non-Zionist or anti-Zionist. A lot of them believe that there's no reason to live anywhere but a Haredi community. I've heard people go so far as to say that because the big Haredi rabbis didn't authorize settling certain towns or settlements or cities, that this is why punishments happen to these people. Come on, you put that nonsense aside when you realize they're real people, and you realize this could have been anyone, and that these are members of your nation. You have a responsibility to pray for them and to care for them, just like you would want someone to pray for you if God forbid this happened to you. But that's 1,000 years of the Knesset would never have achieved this. There is no political dialogue or political discourse that was going to bring this. It has to come to a situation like this, unfortunately, but it does. It comes to a situation like this, where finally people put aside their silly political differences, even for a few weeks, and say, you know what? I wear black. These guys wore kippot suruvot. But I could use their tefillot if this ever happened to one of my kids. And these mothers are suffering regardless of the color of their head coverings or their skirts. And the fathers work hard to support the families. The fathers served in the army. They supported the nation. They risked their lives for us. The least we can do is show appreciation for the suffering they're going through. That's a tremendous breakthrough. It's a really big deal.
I think no. The mainstream of Israel also prayed. As long as prayer is concerned, we prayed most of them for this kind of stuff. Yeah,
I hope so.
okay, it's a breakthrough, but
I hope so.
okay.
But I think that
Except in extremism.
We saw very true, unfortunately, this back also. Like we saw people saying, well, I remember when all these started and they were, like, they didn't see what happened at the end of this operation came out, and it was, at the same time, there was a gay pride in Tel Aviv, and people were saying, there were a few comments on the internet, it was all, we were paying because Hashem is bringing punishment on us because we all gay,
So even tolerance has its limits, but you know, I would think we would do best to focus at least on the positive breakthrough. It's nice. Look, I can tell you from Rabbanim that represent different communities that said some very powerful things. You know, people who focus too much on their particular groups and don't have the same degree of compassion for groups outside of their own are missing the big picture. They're missing the point. They're missing the point. Different groups, maybe they serve different purposes or they fight for different causes, but at the end of the day, if you don't feel that you're a member of the nation, if what happened to these three boys doesn't bother you, there's something profoundly wrong with you. And if you were able to arouse a little bit of compassion, you know, sympathy, empathy, etc., then you dusted off a little bit your connection to Am Yisrael, you know, your sense of responsibility one for the other. Praying for each other is great. Hopefully working together will be even greater, and you know, we'll be able to do that too. But we have a lot of ideological idols that need to be smashed before we can start to function the way a nation is supposed to. But things like this, what can I tell you? It's a positive outcome from a very negative circumstance. All I'm saying is that, you know, these situations should hopefully be too rare for us to rely on them as an impetus for change. We should do what we need to do. We should focus on what we need to focus on. We should clean up our list of priorities and our perspective. Hope these things shouldn't be necessary, but if for nothing else than bringing people closer to an understanding of unity, mutual responsibility. We don't have to like each other very much, but the Arabs seem content to kill Jews no matter what color their hair or their kippah or their skirt, etc. So maybe it is time that we put some of our differences aside and focus a little bit more on what we can do. By the way, I heard that there were Arabs even looking for some of the boys at some point. So they got a lot of press.
They had there was this one boy. He I forget his name. Well, yeah, he made a whole video. And then his relatives wanted to kill him. And he was saying that
He's not going to get
Oh yeah, he's not gonna.
He made a YouTube video about how.
If you want to send him a card like Shana Tova, let's expedite the shipping.
He did a whole YouTube video saying he wanted they had the Israeli government has given him protection to his own relatives because they want to kill him.
Look, it's a very interesting thing. People who are talking about responses, by the way, and how do they respond? What's the proper response? Restraint, not restraint. I've made the point for years, for what it's worth anyway, that terrorism is a purely Arab problem. If this is happening in your culture, it's happening in your town or in your city or in your society, or even beyond your country, because there seem to be quite a lot of countries that embrace Muslim terrorism, it's really incumbent upon the Arabs to change that. In other words, they can't make this problem our problem. We don't need to allow people to be killed. It looks like we're the only ones sacrificing for peace, and that's not going to work. That's not going anywhere. So after all the promises and all these false deals, both the PLO and Hamas equally praised the kidnappings. This is an interesting opportunity for the Arab world to prove itself, or for the Jews that up until now have sympathized with the Arabs and believe that this is a just cause that we should continue to allow our people to be killed for. Maybe we should think a little bit differently. Maybe it's not the end of the world if some of those who up until now have been pushing for these deals where we give land and we get terror in return, maybe we should reconsider a little bit, give them more responsibility, more accountability, and hopefully bring these discussions to a point where the actual facts on the ground determine how people conduct themselves and behave. So instead of talking about, well, in theory, they'd make peace with us if this, that, the other thing, but now they're shooting at you. Now they're kidnapping, now they're bombing. That's a big problem. That has to stop. There's no legitimacy for this. I'm not negotiating with it. I'm not putting up with it anymore. I don't care what the international community thinks. If the international community's children were to be kidnapped and killed, maybe the international community would respond a little bit differently. It hasn't happened to them just yet, but hopefully people should realize that a greater sense of responsibility to each other and a little bit less sense of responsibility to what the rest of the world thinks, because the honest truth is the rest of the world doesn't really care. They just don't care. Presidents don't care. Very few countries spoke about this. Our own president here was in a humiliation to his office, but he went a good 3 weeks without speaking about it at all. So I have nothing but embarrassment over him and how he could have, at very least, taken the right side for once, huh?
Especially when it gets American.
Yeah, an American citizen was kidnapped and he made no comments whatsoever. It's horrible. It's horrible. So if up until now you wanted his approval for something before doing it, maybe it's not worth waiting for. Maybe there are certain things that are right to do regardless. So, please, yeah.
Is it trivial that Israel should give a strong reply to what happened?
So this is a very good question.
I don't know, personally, I would tend to disagree with no, but I would tend to disagree with, if Israel would give a really strong answer now, like enter to Gaza or kill a lot of people, or just say, okay, we have 1,000 people on our list, which are people who will be free for potentially, let's keep them away for 24 hours. We can do that again. I would be quite ashamed to do that.
If Israel were to pursue terrorists, you would be ashamed.
I would actually be.
These are people who've been involved in terrorist acts, and you would be ashamed if we were to apprehend them or capture them or attack them.
I think we should do it.
I'm ashamed that we haven't done it up until now. I'm embarrassed that my country.
They're a threat to all of Israeli society.
My personal attitude is I'm embarrassed that I have a government in my country that up until now knew these people, they knew where they were and what they do, and they didn't do anything about it because they wanted to keep the peace, so to speak.
But why not killing them like 2 months ago?
I'm with you. We should have done this. We should have done this 20 years ago. We should have been doing this a long time ago. My response to it is like this: I'm not interested right now in taking revenge because of what happened, but the entire system is corrupt. The entire system is incompetent. My patience with the rest of the world has run very, very thin. Because I'll be honest with you, I don't think France is ever going to support Israel again for anything. The Arabs could have killed 1,000 Jews and France wouldn't have said anything about it because they don't care. So their opinion to me is irrelevant. In other words, I don't care if they praise me for doing something or if they criticize me. They're just irrelevant. They're not judges. These aren't people that I'm interested in hearing their opinions. The same goes for the British and the Germans and the Swiss and, for that matter, the Americans at this point. I'm no longer interested in what these people have to say. The question is like this. Here's a point that was made by Rav Kahana. Okay? He was a very eloquent writer. Rav Kahana made a point. He'd been incarcerated